Integrating on-premises workloads with Azure services through a DNS forwarder will help route name resolution queries from your on-premises network to Azure's private DNS zones. This is crucial when using Azure private endpoints as it allows on-premises resources to connect to Azure services securely via private IP addresses instead of public endpoints. Why use a DNS forwarder? A DNS forwarder will act as an intermediary that forwards DNS queries from one network to another DNS service for resolution. This setup is necessary when on-premises resources need to resolve Azure service names to private IP addresses associated with private endpoints in Azure. Without a DNS forwarder, on-premises DNS servers would resolve these queries to the public IPs of the Azure services and will bypass private endpoint and also expose the traffic to the internet. Let's unpack the steps needed for setting up DNS forwarding for on-premises workload. First, deploy an Azure DNS forwarder. Azure DNS forwarder can be a virtual machine in Azure, typically configured to forward DNS queries to Azure's built-in DNS service. This VM must be part of the VNet link to the private DNS zone where your private endpoints are configured. Next, you set up conditional forwarding rules on your on-premise DNS servers. These rules define that queries for Azure service domain should be sent to the Azure DNS forwarder instead of resolving to public IPs. For example, a rule on the on-premise DNS server could forward queries for star.blob.co.windows.net to DNS forwarder's IP address in Azure. Next, you should ensure that the private DNS zone is linked to the Azure VNet containing the DNS forwarder. This enables the forwarder VM to resolve these names to the private endpoint IPs. Lastly, test name resolution from an on-premise machine. A query for an Azure service should resolve to the private IP configured in the private endpoint and confirm that the query is being directed to Azure's private DNS zone through the forwarder. In short, by using a DNS forwarder, you create a seamless, secure connection between on-premises and Azure environments and allow consistent DNS resolution for private endpoints without exposing resources to the internet.